Hello and welcome. Here are breaking stories from outside Africa. We begin on the 700th day of the conflict. Hamas released footage showing two Israeli hostages, Gilboa-Dalal and Elon Ohel, being driven through Gaza City, an emotional appeal that is deepening domestic pressure on Israel amid stalled ceasefire negotiations. Gilboa-Dalal, held for about 22 months, appears in the video pleading for his release and warning that other captives face growing danger. Now, the release comes as large protests erupt across Israel over the government's handling of talks, and as the IDF says it controls roughly 40% of Gaza City and more than 70% of the territory overall. Humanitarian agencies report soaring civilian casualties and collapsing services. UNICEF warned that Gaza City has become increasingly uninhabitable for children. Hostage families cautioned that any further escalation could imperil those still held, even as international criticisms mount over civilian suffering. Away from that, President Emmanuel Macron has ordered regional hospitals to ready themselves to treat up to 15,000 wounded soldiers within 180 days, with readiness measures to be in place by March 2026. Now, Health Minister Catherine Vautrin framed the directive as a precaution in light of NATO assessments that Russia could pose a threat within 3 to 5 years, part of a wider push in Europe to adopt a wartime readiness posture. Now, the measures accompanies heightened defenses spending across NATO. Members states are moving to meet the agreed 2% of GDP defense target, and alliance planners are encouraging higher preparedness benchmarks. Officials say that the planning exercise will cover staff trauma capacity and logistics to ensure the health system can absorb large-scale military casualties if needed. Now, finally, more than 30 nations gathered in Paris to coordinate long-term security for Ukraine, pledging continued military aid and coordinated economic pressure on Moscow, even as Russian President Vladimir Putin rebuffed ceasefire proposals. Our UK Defense Secretary John Healey and other ministers vowed sustained support, while leaders discussed using frozen Russian assets to finance reconstruction and defense. The summit follows renewed Russian airstrikes and warnings against foreign troop deployments. France and the UK announced additional measures, including relocating or reallocating seized or frozen assets to back Ukraine's recovery. With civilian casualties rising, allies stressed a long-term commitment to Ukraine's security, even as diplomatic deadlock persists. Now, joining us to speak more on this, we have Ejike Ekpa. He is a global affairs analyst. Thank you so much, Ejike, for your time and for joining us on this. It's a pleasure. Now, Ejike, let's start with what the significance of the UK's pledge to support Ukraine before and after a peace deal is reached is all about. Speak to us. All right, so Ejike, we're having an issue with your audio, but we will definitely be coming back to you. So we would like to take a quick break now. When we come back, we'll continue this discussion. Stay with us. Welcome back, and thank you for staying. This is still Beyond the Continent, and we still have our global affairs analyst, Ejike Ekpa, still with us. Ejike, before the break, you were talking about the significance of the UK pledge to support Ukraine before and after a peace deal is reached.
Well, it's significant because, this time the European nations, are rallying for one of their own. Whether that, comes to stay and become effective, we'll say it. But all along, it has been America that is shouldering, most of the conflict in the NATO nations or Western Europe. So for them to come around and say, we're going to back Ukraine and we'll support them, is a welcome development. I think if you remember in Trump's first term, he said, Europeans should start contributing to their own security. I think any nation or any region that is worthy of what it is they're trying to do is supposed to pay for their own security and not have somebody else do it.
Okay, But then how does, the Paris summit shape the prospects of, the peace negotiations in Ukraine?
Well, again, it's one of those who are here for our own. I think, even though Ukraine is not a member of NATO, one of the clauses in the membership for NATO is, if you attack one, you attack all. So maybe they are not going to have soldiers in Ukraine to fight Russia because, that will escalate the conflict. But at least it will give the Russian side an opportunity or a concern that, hey, Ukraine is not standing alone in this conflict, they're going to support them. But we need to see how that support goes to persuade Russia, to either come to the table and take the ceasefire, serious. If not, it could just be another joke. Excuse my use of that word. But that's what we're going to see.
You talked about it, might be a joke, but then, are there any kinds of security guarantees that will be most meaningful and effective for Ukraine?
The most effective guarantee is going to be where the both parties to this conflict have agreed to say, hey, let what it is, let it be. If Ukraine is insisting to get back all the land that Russia has occupied or taken, it's going to make it harder. Because, the land that Russia has taken, usually, at the area occupied by Russian-speaking, Ukrainians. So if that adjustment is, made and the two parties said, okay, fine, here's the line. Remember, back in 1989, there's a book, actually, if anybody's interested in how this thing all started, it's called Not 1 Inch. It was a statement that was made by then Secretary of State Jim Baker during George Bush Sr. Term, say, hey, NATO is not going to go 1 inch. But, now Russia has seen that NATO has gone more than 1 inch, and it's one of those broken promises in an international diplomacy, because nothing said, it always stays the same. Somehow, somewhere, over time, or because nobody's looking, somebody's going to violate it. And so, just for historic perspective, all these things started in 1989 when Mikhail Gorbachev was, president, and, Jim Baker assured him, not 1 inch. There's actually a book on it, and it was written a few years ago for those who want to get some good, research material on how this whole thing, started bubbling and now it's becoming a full conflict.
All right, so let's, link this to a directive, given as a precaution in light of NATO's assessment that, Russia could pose a threat within 3 to 5 years, talking about the president of France telling regional hospitals to be ready for war. Would love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, again, if the ceasefire doesn't come to stake and get obeyed and observed by the parties to it, there's always this anticipation that, hey, this conflict could, get blown over, and then when that happens, it's going to be casualty as people are going to start fleeing, either Russia or Ukraine and then the entire region. So I don't know why Macron is doing this. Macron seems to want to be, the big boy in Western Europe, even though France is crumbling. But it's good that at least he's speaking up and saying the things he's saying. But, France doesn't have any fighting army. England doesn't have any. Germany doesn't have. There's no Western European country that has any army that can actually go and withstand any fight. Okay. So if doing this is going to say, hey, we are prepared in case there's a conflict and we're going to, at least receive the people and treat them, we're going to wait and see. But the most important thing is that Russia and Ukraine be sincere about their desire to come to have peace. You don't have to love thy neighbor, but you could tolerate thy thy neighbor. And that's what I don't see happening. You know, Trump had a summit with Putin in Alaska. We thought that was going to signal some major move. Obviously, it hasn't. But again, you don't lose hope. In the world of international relationships, all you got to do is the human factor. And in that human factor is a huge ego, because no country wants to be dictated to, and every country feels, hey, we can do what we want, except when you have an advantage over them and you can force them to the table.
All right. Well, thank you so much, ATK, for your time and for speaking on this.
Well, thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.